Here at the 2014 General Assembly, I have a chance to sit with somebody who I love, who has been on Shalom TV JBS before. You've seen him, you know him from CBS. Dan Raviv, National News Correspondent. How lovely to have you here.
I loved bumping into you here at the GA. There are thousands of people, and of course there's something about you and me. We bumped into
Absolutely.
each other.
So look, we just came from hearing Vice President Biden. He talked about the U.S. Israeli relationship. Right now, as we are meeting, we're still in the afterglow or aftermath of what seems to be a kind of insult that came out of Jeffrey Goldberg's article in The Atlantic, in which reportedly somebody in the American administration referred to Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, chicken blank. And you and I have spoken about it a little bit off camera. I really wanted to get your sense of, number one, where do you think it comes from? Is it a message being sent from the administration, or do you feel it may be a symptom of something else?
Well, I don't think on that day anyone in the Obama administration was trying to stir up a new crisis in relations with Netanyahu. The fact is that Jeffrey Goldberg, who's a great columnist for The Atlantic, and he has a Bloomberg View column as well, is working on a book. I understand it's about how President Obama has dealt with the Middle East, and to be frank, how the Middle East has dealt with him. And Jeff Goldberg's great and has the inside word, and so he talks to officials. He's apparently well liked in the Obama White House. The president has seen him at least a couple of times. And so along the way, one of Obama's officials who works on these things said that Bibi Netanyahu is, and then there's that barnyard epithet for chicken droppings, suggesting that Netanyahu is a coward. Now, this really offended, of course, the Netanyahu office, who said a coward. Netanyahu was a military commando. Obama never even served in the armed forces, and they're arguing down to that level. Now, what I think the guy in the White House meant, though again, he wasn't trying to stir up a crisis that day, was that in the Obama White House view, Bibi Netanyahu isn't courageous enough to make concessions on the Palestinian issue.
Concessions.
Well,
right.
That's what the Obama White House actually wants.
It's not that he's not brave enough to go to war.
Well, they mentioned there that luckily he's also not started a war with Iran. So I've heard that view also from people close to the Obama White House. But
no one's criticizing him as a coward for not going to war against Iran.
Exactly, because the U.S. is thrilled that, that
Exactly.
Israel didn't bomb Iran. Got
Exactly.
you there. So they're trying to criticize him, maybe annoy him, but I don't think it was aimed at him. I think it was an official not for attribution. That's not the same as off the record where you shouldn't use the quote. Not for attribution. As a reporter, you should never say who that official was. And he was describing what we in the team think of Bibi Netanyahu. And Jeff Goldberg needs that for his book and for his column. And I don't think anybody who's in the Democratic Party would want that to come out just before the midterm elections, where some Jews would feel perhaps even worse about Obama and what he thinks about Israel. So certainly Jerusalem thought it ought to respond, and certainly people close to Bibi were annoyed at this. But look, here, and at other forums I've gone to, here at the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America, officials of both sides, the U.S. and Israeli governments, are saying, oh, it's nothing. Look at the military aid, the intelligence exchanges, look at the solid diplomatic support that the U.S. has given to Israel. You shouldn't worry. And like you say, Mark, Vice President Biden spoke to the group right here in Washington, and to this huge Jewish General Assembly. He did say, we drive each other crazy. The U.S. and Israel were friends, and he really meant my boss, Mr. Obama, and Prime Minister Netanyahu. We drive each other crazy. He said, we love each other, but this is what I'm hearing from officials on both sides. Basically, the countries are friends. Don't think that's falling apart. But especially on the Palestinian issue, they disagree, and they say so bluntly to each other.
The Israeli perspective, the Jewish perspective here in America, among those who are, quote, pro-Israel, is that the tone matters. Everybody appreciates the extent to which there has been extraordinary cooperation and military aid and intelligence cooperation between the two countries. But there is a feeling, Dan, that if the tone seems to be bitter, it strengthens Palestinian resolve to refuse to make what Israel considers to be not simply necessary concessions, but realistic concessions, obvious concessions.
Well, it may well do that. But let's just say that the U.S.-Israeli relationship has tried it all sorts of ways. There have been presidents and prime ministers who didn't get along, and then there have been presidents and prime ministers like Bill Clinton and Yitzhak Rabin who got along great, or like George W. Bush and Arik Sharon. And some people, including friends of Israel, especially if they're liberals and they really want a deal with the Palestinians, they say the Bush period with Arik Sharon, what did that accomplish? The U.S. stood right by the Israeli government in everything Sharon wanted to do, and there also, the Arabs just said, the U.S. and Israel are the same, they're in the same pocket, they're unsympathetic. So Obama clearly has been trying a different tack. Mm-hmm. Don't forget all the background music, Iran and its nuclear program, a pledge by the Obama administration, repeated by Biden here in no uncertain terms, we won't let Iran get a nuclear weapon.
He said that clearly, didn't
And the
he?
background music also is ISIS and the Arab Spring that became, of course, revolutions and death and destruction, including the civil war in Syria. So that's not to be forgotten. And certainly, U.S. officials know Israel's the reliable ally. Israel is the democracy in the middle of all this. And they get annoyed that Netanyahu puts Israel's defense and concerns first. Obviously, you'd expect him to do that.
Wouldn't you?
But at the White House, they get kind of annoyed with that. But they don't cut off aid. And Congress, of course, is still the great protector of Israel's interests here.
Okay.
Congress will continue to be the strong point for Israel's interests.
There are ways you can bring insight here that I can't get from anybody else. Here's what I hear. I want you to give me your reaction. There are Jews who say, during the Gaza war, despite all of the good work with the Iron Dome, at one moment, President Obama was so upset with the way in which Israel was conducting the war and apparently responsible for civilian casualties, that he was not going to replenish Israeli arms. I hear Vice President Biden come to the GA today and talk about the extent to which America stood behind Israel during the Gaza war.
And gave emergency assistance during the war. The way he worded it was, as Hamas rockets were hitting Israel. That he meant during the Gaza war. So the pro-Israel part of the Obama line, that would be Vice President Biden, wanted to point out, we gave more money. So he was countering, attempting to, exactly the episode you've just described.
Okay, and I'm asking you, how significant should it be to the American Jewish community and those who are pro-Israel? How upset should Jews be that the Obama administration was, for a very long moment, extraordinarily critical in public condemnation of the way Israel was conducting the war, and also at one point threatened not to replenish Israeli arms? How upset should Jews be?
Well, I don't think very, but in general, I'm not an Oi Gewalt kind of person. And I wrote a book called Friends Indeed about the U.S. and Israel relationship from 1948, and I've seen these ups and downs. That was a brief down in which I felt Washington was really trying to tell Israel, you're killing too many civilians and too many children. There's been this ugly incident at a UN school, as U.S. officials put it. Even that, the IDF, by the way, disputes whose shell might have hit the school. And anyway, Hamas was putting rocket launchers right next to civilians. Got that. But the Obama administration, I think, wanted to send a message. Now, they did not stop the replenishment. What they did was change the method by which replenishment would be approved. Apparently, someone in the White House, when they found out that Israel's military easily gets replenished with ammunition, more shells, etc., because the Pentagon has even pre-stocked materials in Israel, the White House said they don't even ask us on the political side. They just ask the Pentagon and we give it. We're not sure we always want to do that. And so they said, let's have more control over this. So you could be so pro-Obama or calm about it to say, he was changing the bureaucracy a little. But at that time, I agree with you, it was a message to Israel, hey, don't forget, we send you aid, and if we make a statement that we think you should be more careful in your military operations, we stand for your right to defend yourself, but it makes all of us look bad when so many civilians die. The U.S. was sending that message. I'll give you that. I don't think it's terribly upsetting, because I agree in the end that the military aid still flows. I have another episode, though, that might upset some of your viewers. When General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in public this past week, said that it was incredible what the Israeli military did, warning people, really trying to
complimentary of Israel.
Unbelievable. Yes, I say it was unbelievable, but unbelievably positive toward the IDF. Never has a military warned civilians to that extent. Phone calls, warning shots to get out of those buildings. He really was complimentary. And then at the State Department, the subject came up, and a reporter said, last time you were on record, Jen Psaki, spokeswoman for Secretary Kerry, last time this came up, you were criticizing Israel must do more to live up to its own high standards. And Jen Psaki said, that's still my view. That's our official policy. Well, are you saying, a reporter said, that General Martin Dempsey, with decades in the military, doesn't know what he's talking about? He's a military expert, and he praised the IDF. And she said, they could have done more. Now, this has exposed, of course, some differences within the American government that have always existed, and you could put it in a general view we've had for decades. The State Department's tough on Israel, but Israel's known that. The State Department's not generally filled with friendly analysts.
And Dan, what's the relationship between the executive, the White House, and the State Department? Is the State Department an arm of the Obama administration, or is it a separate entity?
My, we've heard that in almost every administration. Of course, the president names the Secretary of State, who is then confirmed by Congress, right? And that is John Kerry. Got it. And Kerry, by the way, of course, tried really hard to bring the Israelis and Palestinians peace, and when he was disappointed in the end, he blamed both, but put a lot of blame on Israel because in Kerry's view, Israel's our friend. Israel's the stronger party. Israel should have made the concessions. Hey, that's the Obama team's view, with an extra little spice added by the State Department that historically the Middle East experts in the State Department are critical.
Okay, do you understand why it's upsetting to a certain segment of American Jewry?
Sure I do. I'm a calm person. I said I wasn't in the Oiga Volt lobby in any way. I'm an analyst. I do think, it's so true, Israel has no better friend than the United States. That has included the Obama administration, but they fervently wish in the White House that there could be a deal with the Palestinians. They say, why won't Bibi make a deal? And then you remind them, the Israeli people elected Bibi and his general right-wing cabinet, and Washington says, I guess.
And what you assume is that in some way, the American administration believes there's no deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis because of Israel and Bibi Netanyahu?
They look at both sides as being really annoying, if I can use a word that often is used by U.S. officials. But they get more annoyed by the guy who's our friend. Doesn't he see how important it is to U.S. interests to have a deal over the West Bank and Jerusalem? It's so important to the U.S. that Israel should be trying triple hard. Israel should be trying triple hard to help the U.S. So we get madder at our friend. Now again, this is a little bit like Biden. We drive each other crazy, but we're still friends. Do we still love each other? I don't know about Barack Obama, but he's out of office in just over 2 years. The next president,
you're so honest. You are so honest. You are fabulous. By the way, do you imagine that when Biden says, we won't make a bad deal, and America, he virtually promised, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon.
But he really wants a deal. Biden made it clear, and so has the president.
So what do you think?
Because a deal, they say, is the most lasting way.
What's going to happen?
I think there'll be a deal unless the Iranians sort of spoil it. I think it's more likely the Iranians will give in at almost the last moment, bazaar style. You're walking away, you don't want to buy the Persian carpet. That merchant's going to follow you. I'll make a deal. I think there'll be a deal. I doubt Israel will be happy. Then you have the 64 million shekel question. Will Israel do anything about it, or just keep watching, or like the spies I've written about in the past, really step up the sabotage inside Iran?
So you and I have to speak after whatever deal is or is not made. I have one journalistic question for you. And again, there's no one I can ask but you.
Okay.
Dan, there are times when Jewish groups have meetings, quote, off the record with U.S. officials. Or AIPAC will have a meeting at AIPAC, which is closed to the press. 150 people will be in the room. Ordinary people, average Jews who are at an AIPAC meeting. And at the same time, it's not open to the press. What they mean is, we can't put it on JBS, and in theory, it shouldn't be in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. Would you explain to me what the rationale of, what is the rationale of that? Because I say to myself, If 150 Jews are in a room, if 50 Jewish leaders are in a room, the 50 leaders leave the room, they're going to talk to their wives, their friends.
It's not only going to leak out. It's not only going to leak out, it's going to leak out in a distorted way, the old telephone game.
Okay, so
the point, you ready? Here's the main thing,
yes.
And I mean in places like this, where despite the large sessions that we are attending and you're able to videotape, there are also the big givers who get the special access and the special briefings. Happens at all the conferences. It's to make them feel special. They may leak it afterward, but they feel special.
Dan Raviv, you've been a good friend. I appreciate it very, very much.
I love JBS. Everyone should watch.
Thank you. Dan Raviv. At the 2014 General Assembly, what a pleasure I have sitting with Michael Siegal, who's the chairman of the Board of Trustees of JFNA. Thank you for spending a moment with us, Michael.
Mark, it's my pleasure.
But from my perspective, the GA has been spectacular this year.
Thank you.
The plenaries were good. You got some great breakouts, and this is true of every one of these General Assemblies. Whom you meet in the halls are also wonderful. Who you have dinner with. So mazal tov. Well done.
Thank you very much.
How many GAs have you been to now?
I've only actually been about 5 or 6.
Okay.
I have not been a lifelong GA attender.
Okay. Are you having a good time?
I'm having a very interesting time indeed.
I assume there's a little bit more pressure on you than most of us.
I get to spend 5 minutes in a lot of rooms, so it's more about, in my case, quantity rather than quality.
You are from Cleveland.
I'm born and bred in Cleveland.
Okay, so one question that has nothing to do with GA. Are you excited that LeBron James came back?
Yes, as a matter of fact, and we're thrilled to be able to say first place Cleveland Browns. So we don't get to say that often in Cleveland.
You don't mean Cleveland Browns, though?
I'm sorry?
You don't mean Cleveland Browns?
No, I mean Cleveland Browns, and we're happy to have LeBron, too.
I got it. All right. We just came out of a plenary session where the Vice President of the United States addressed the GA.
Yes.
One of the things he made a big point of is the extraordinary relationship between the United States and Israel. To what extent do you feel the JFNA's vision and its mission has to do with Israel, and to what extent does it have to do with the needs of the American Jewish community here at home?
Well, when you try and break down really how our donors, which we ultimately are responsible to and for, actually allocate their money in their local communities, you're 85% domestic and about 15% overseas. But there's no question that Israel has been a galvanizing issue for us in so many ways that it is always on the agenda. So we work with our partners, the Jewish Agency for Israel and the Joint Distribution Committee, as well as the Ethiopian National Project and ORT to some degree. But our donors really want us through the JFNA to allocate their overseas dollars appropriately, but ultimately the JFNA is responsible to really maintain a vibrant domestic Jewish community.
Okay. Michael, I start that way because I'm curious about how you sensed the room when the Vice President spoke. I thought, and you can tell me whether you agree with me, I thought that the room was very interested in what the Vice President of the United States, representing the current American administration, had to say about Israel, the relationship between the administration and Israel, and also its stand on Iran going nuclear, and making a commitment in that room.
I think you have to look at it as both, Joe Biden as a representative of the administration, obviously the Vice President of the United States, but also who Joe Biden is on a lifelong plethora of things that he's done with and for the Jewish community. So Iran is obviously an issue that's in the headlines, but Joe Biden and the administration has done things for Holocaust survivors. They're doing things on health and human services. They're doing things, obviously, on military cooperation beyond just the issue of Iran. So I think Iran is in the headlines, but it's much more in terms of the relationship between Israel and the United States, as well as the Jewish community and the things that we stand for as Americans.
Excellent. I want to concentrate for a moment now simply on JFNA. And I want to tell you my own story. My own story, Michael, is that I'm a huge fan of the federation system, and I believe it has really been the bulwark of the survival of the American Jewish community. And I am a rabbi in Stamford, Connecticut, and I constantly am telling anybody I can tell, that what federations do in every community across the country, they're not a fundraising organization. They are basically a fund distribution organization. What federations do, whether it's in Stamford, Connecticut, or whether it's in Cleveland or any place across the country, is it gives Jews like me an opportunity to say, here's money that I want to allocate for my contributions to the welfare of the Jewish future, but you decide how to spend it. And you spend it 85% domestically, 15%, but it's you do for me what I can't do.
Well, thank you. I think that we are sensitive to also a changing dynamic of young versus old, gender issues, race issues. I think from the construct of who we are as a community, so much depends upon the dynamics of the current environment. Young are always going to be dissatisfied to a degree of institutions that their parents founded, which is probably what I said when I was 30 years old.
Probably.
In fact, it was, I can tell you. But now that I am the institution kind of scenario, it's kind of how did I get here? But the Federation is really greatly concerned about being stewards of the money and being great fiduciaries of the responsibility of the priorities of our community's agenda. And so the Federation touches more people in more ways than all the other Jewish organizations. And we should be very proud of the things that we're involved
Absolutely.
with in terms of health and human services, in terms of the contributions we make to the broader community, not just the Jewish community. And so the Federation has a very, very broad agenda. But obviously, as the one word artist said, you know, I am the Jew of all means. I am the one who is proud when we win a Nobel Prize, and I am the one embarrassed when somebody gets arrested for doing something wrong. So it is our collective DNA
Yes.
to care about each other so passionately
Yes.
that oftentimes we forget the positives and the opportunities, and all we want to do is talk about the challenges.
Okay, take 1 minute, just 1 minute, because I only have a few minutes with you all together. How did you get involved in JFNA?
Well, I think that, you know, like anything else, you get asked. And so
Were you in Jewish life at the time?
Well, I was, you know, when I was younger and came back to my community as a young adult and said, what am I going to be involved with? And I didn't want to be involved with my parents were involved in, because they were involved. And my parents were involved in the Jewish National Fund, so they didn't have to do that. And like, you know, most young people, the Federation doesn't need me. They're so big, I can't make a difference. So I got involved very young into Israel Bonds, because Israel Bonds always carried a message of Jewish strength, as opposed to, oh, poor Jews. And so I was always about Jewish pride, Jewish expression of strength and not weakness. And that was appealing to me as a young person, but I was involved locally in the JFNA, in the campaign, and a variety of other things. And, you know, part of my past is I was the former chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Israel Bond. So I think one of the few that have gotten to lead two different Jewish American organizations. And, you know, really this job came to me because somebody said, we really need you to do this job. And so I'm honored and privileged.
Okay, and one more question on this line. Your own Jewish identity, it was formed when and how? When and how? Was it as a kid? Your parents' home?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, you always are a reflection of your parents to some degree.
Right.
My parents were involved. You know, I grew up in a predominantly Jewish area. I didn't feel anti-Semitism. My family was blessed enough to not be directly involved in the Holocaust. My family came out much earlier from Europe. I just felt, you know, that being Jewish was who I was, and I never wanted to run from it. It was either going to be foisted upon me by outsiders, or I could stand tall and say, this is who I am. And so I think part of it is your self-identification, but it was also my parents gave me a great deal of education in that regard.
Okay. If we had more time, I want to go down every one of these alleys, but I want to ask you one overarching final question.
Sure.
It was mentioned at the first plenary session here at the GA. There is a concern. You read the Pew Report, you just watch what's happening on the American Jewish scene, and there's a concern for how do we engage the next generation to be involved and committed to Israel and to Jewish life here in America, to also be involved in Jewish philanthropy and making sure that gifts not only go to the museum and the hospital, but also to the Jewish world. You said something interesting about yourself. When you were a young person, we're not necessarily engaged the way you are as an adult, as
Oh, for sure.
Okay. And Michael, sometimes I feel that we're too pessimistic about the younger generation, that we forget that we were not engaged at their age, and that there is something that happens. And I'm not saying we shouldn't care or not try to engage people at 13 and beyond, but I'm also saying you're an example of something that I think is very real. And I wonder if you would reflect upon how you feel the American Jewish community is going. What concerns you? Are you optimistic?
Well, let's talk strictly about the American Jewish community. Thank you for the question. We have genuine concerns of our place right now, different than all other places. I think that, when we were younger, growing up, three things were whispered. One was cancer. If somebody had cancer, you said cancer. If somebody was divorced, you said, it was whispered, divorce. Their parents are divorced. The other aspect of it was, gee, they're intermarried. It wasn't spoken out loud, and today the statistics are different. You look at the Jewish birth rate and you look at intermarriage as a challenge as opposed to an opportunity. And so I think that unlike other particular times, the American Jewish narrative has been fostered by immigration always, whether it was the German Jews or the Eastern European Jews, or then the Russian Jews, or then the Israeli Jews. And so when you look at our overall numbers, we've probably always been challenged on our birth rate in the secular community, the non-Orthodox community. Today, we have no more immigration. And so we're going to be challenged in the non-Orthodox community to effectuate a birth rate that allows us to replace ourselves, and that's the most dangerous statistic in the Pew Report. So we need to widen our umbrella now. We cannot be challenged by the fact that the Orthodox are different. The Orthodox are us. The intermarried couple has to be embraced by the Jewish community and welcomed as part of the community. So whether it is an intermarried family with a Jew by birth and a Jew by choice, or whether that person has not chosen to come to the Jewish religion, the American Jewish community needs to embrace all aspects of our wide tent and widen it further. Otherwise, the immigration that has been fostering us for the last 100 years, which I don't think is going to be coming, is going to make us less relevant on the things that we care about, and the things that we care about makes America better.
Michael Siegal, you're fabulous, and I'm sorry we only have this much time.
My pleasure.
I need you to come to the studio one day and just talk to me about your sense of Jewish life. You're out of this world. Mazal tov on a fabulous GA.
You don't mind.
You bet, you bet. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha.
Thank you so much.
Michael Siegal, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of JFNA.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.